The cold January breeze swept through the bustling streets of New York City. Bright lights and sparkling decorations from the New Year's celebrations still adorned the towering skyscrapers, casting a festive glow over the city that never sleeps. Inside Grant Jewels, one of Manhattan's most prestigious jewelry stores, the air was anything but celebratory. William Grant, the sharp-eyed and composed owner of the empire, leaned against his glass display cases, his mind racing with suspicion. For weeks, William had been troubled by a puzzling mystery. One of his most exquisite diamond necklaces, valued at over $1 million, had vanished. No alarms had gone off, and there were no signs of forced entry. To William, this wasn't just about the financial loss, it was about trust. His business was built on precision, loyalty, and an unshakable reputation. A crack in that foundation could be catastrophic. His suspicion had zeroed in on one employee, Sophia. She was the quiet one, always keeping to herself, always looking slightly out of place among the polished elegance of the store. She was punctual, hardworking, and polite to customers. But something about her demeanor gnawed at William. Recently, he had noticed her glancing over her shoulder, her hands trembling slightly as she rearranged displays. There was a shadow behind her composed exterior, and William was determined to uncover it. That afternoon, as the store's closing time neared, William decided to confront her. He called her to his office, his voice steady but firm. "Sophia," he said, his eyes piercing, "I need to talk to you." Sophia hesitated, her eyes darting nervously. She nodded and followed him, her footsteps echoing in the empty store. Inside the office, the tension was palpable. William wasted no time. "There's something going on," he began, locking eyes with her. "And I believe you know more than you're letting on." Sophia's face turned pale. I don't understand," she stammered. William's gaze didn't waver. He pointed to her bag. "Let me see what's in there." Sophia froze. For a moment, it looked as though she might refuse. But then, silently, she handed him her bag. William opened it methodically, his movements slow and deliberate. His heart raced as he sifted through the contents. A wallet, a notebook, a compact mirror. Nothing unusual. But then, tucked into a hidden side pocket, he found something that made his breath catch in his throat. It was an old, worn necklace. Not just any necklace, but one he recognized immediately. His fingers trembled as he held it up. It was Grace's, the very same necklace he had given her as a New Year's gift 20 years ago. The last night he had seen her before she vanished without a trace. "Where did you get this?" William demanded, his voice low and sharp, cutting through the thick silence. Sophia's eyes widened in confusion and fear. It belonged to my mother," she whispered. She always said it was her most cherished possession. William's mind spun. The resemblance was undeniable now. How had he not noticed before? The same soft eyes, the same delicate features. Could it be true? Could Sophia be the daughter he never knew he had? The daughter Grace had kept hidden? In that moment, the puzzle pieces of his past and present began to collide. William realized this wasn't just about a missing necklace. It was about unearthing a truth that had been buried for over a decade. If you're as shocked as I am by this revelation, stick around. What happens next will change everything. Don't forget to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel to uncover the rest of this incredible story. The morning sunlight spilled over the shimmering skyscrapers of Manhattan, painting the bustling city in golden hues. Despite the brightness of the new year, William Grant's office felt like a storm brewing. The discovery of the necklace the night before had left him shaken. He couldn't ignore the uncanny resemblance between Sophia and Grace, the woman he had loved and lost. The thought nagged at him like an unresolved chord in a melody, threatening to unravel his carefully constructed life. William wasn't just a successful businessman. He was a man who built his empire from the ground up. Grant Jewels wasn't merely a chain of high-end jewelry stores. It was a reflection of his precision, control, and relentless drive. Behind his stoic demeanor was a man who lived for his work, using it as a shield to bury the grief of losing Grace. Her disappearance on New Year's Eve 20 years ago had shattered his world, and every sparkling diamond he sold since felt like an echo of what he'd lost. Sophia's presence, however, was more than just a reminder. It was a crack in the armor he'd worn for years. He couldn't shake the image of her wide, fearful eyes when he confronted her about the necklace. What was her connection to Grace? Why had she never mentioned her mother before? These questions gnawed at him as he pored over his schedule, though his mind was far from business. Across the store floor, Sophia moved with her usual quiet efficiency. She straightened displays and polished glass cases, but her mind was far from her work. The confrontation with William had left her rattled. She had never expected the necklace to draw such intense attention, especially from her boss. For Sophia, it was simply a piece of her mother, a token of a life she barely remembered. Her mother's stories about the necklace were vague, always tinged with sadness. "It's precious," her mother had said once, running her fingers over the intricate design. "It represents a promise." But when Sophia pressed for details, her mother would simply smile wistfully and change the subject. After her mother's passing, the necklace became Sophia's sole connection to the woman she loved and lost. Now, William's reaction had unearthed more questions than answers. His intense gaze, the way his hand trembled when he held the necklace, it was as though he recognized it. What could it mean? And why did he seem so sure that there was more to her story? Back in his office, William scrolled through his records, searching for anything that might explain the connection. He found Sophia's resume. It was unremarkable, listing a modest education and a string of retail jobs before joining Grant Jewels. Nothing about it suggested a connection to Grace or their shared past. Yet, the resemblance was undeniable. And that necklace, it was more than coincidence. Unable to focus on work, William turned to his assistant, Diane, a trusted confidant who had been with him since the early days of Grant Jewels. She noticed his distracted demeanor immediately. "Something's bothering you," Diane said, folding her arms as she leaned against the doorway. "You've been pacing since you walked in." William hesitated, weighing whether to involve her in this personal matter. But if anyone could help him piece together this puzzle, it was Diane. He held up the necklace, the delicate chain glittering in the light. "Do you remember this?" he asked. Diane's eyes widened as recognition dawned on her. That's Grace's necklace, the one you gave her for New Year's." William nodded. Sophia had it. She said it belonged to her mother. Diane frowned. "Sophia? The new hire? That's strange. You think there's a connection?" "I don't think," William said, his voice firm. "I know. She looks like Grace." "Diane, it's not just the necklace, it's her eyes. Her face. She could be—" He trailed off, the words catching in his throat. Diane's expression softened. "You think she's your daughter?" William nodded slowly. "I don't know how it's possible, but if she is, I have to find out. And if she's connected to Grace, maybe I can finally get answers about what happened all those years ago." Meanwhile, Sophia's unease grew. She couldn't shake the feeling that William's reaction to the necklace was more than curiosity. It was personal. Determined to get to the bottom of it, she resolved to ask him directly. After her shift, she made her way to his office, pausing outside the door as nerves threatened to get the better of her. Finally, she knocked. "Mr. Grant, can I speak with you?" William looked up from his desk, his expression unreadable. "Come in." "Sophia." She stepped inside, clasping her hands together to steady herself. "About last night," she began, her voice hesitant. "I feel like there's something you're not telling me." "You recognized that necklace, didn't you?" William's gaze sharpened. For a moment, he considered brushing her off, but something in her tone stopped him. She deserved the truth, or at least as much of it as he could give. "I did," he admitted. "It belonged to someone I cared about deeply, someone I lost a long time ago." Sophia tilted her head, her brow furrowing. "My mother, she always said it was a gift, a promise." "Is it possible you knew her?" William hesitated. The pieces of the puzzle were aligning. but there was still so much he didn't know. "Tell me about your mother." "Sophia," he said carefully. "What was her name?" Sophia hesitated. "Grace," she said softly. "Her name was Grace." The room seemed to freeze as the words hung in the air. William's chest tightened. A mix of shock, sorrow, and hope swirling within him. He leaned forward, his voice trembling. "Sophia," he said, his tone urgent. "We need to talk about everything." The revelation of Grace's name hung in the air like a thundercloud. William stared at Sophia, his mind racing as fragments of the past collided with the present. He had always believed that Grace had disappeared by choice, leaving him without explanation or closure. But now, the daughter he never knew existed stood before him, holding the missing link to a truth that had eluded him for years. "Grace," he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. He leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his face. "This changes everything." Sophia shifted uneasily. She had come here to demand answers, but now it felt like William had just as many questions as she did. "What does this mean?" she asked cautiously. "Why does my mother's name matter so much to you?" William locked eyes with her, the weight of years of grief and uncertainty etched into his expression. "Because Grace wasn't just someone I knew," he said slowly. "She was everything to me. We were supposed to get married. We had plans, dreams. And then, one day, she was gone." Sophia froze, her heart pounding. Her mother had never spoken of a man from her past, let alone someone who had meant so much to her. The pieces didn't add up. "She never told me about you," Sophia said, her voice trembling. "She only ever said she left New York because she needed a fresh start. That's all." William's gaze softened, but the pain in his eyes was unmistakable. "I don't believe she left willingly," he said firmly. There were too many unanswered questions, too many things that didn't make sense. "And now, after all these years, you're here with her necklace. That can't be a coincidence." Later that day, as the sun dipped behind the Manhattan skyline, William found himself pacing in his office. His usual composure was nowhere to be found. The discovery of Sophia's connection to Grace had cracked open a door he thought was forever closed. He picked up the necklace from his desk, tracing its intricate design with his fingers. The memories came rushing back. Grace's laughter, the way her eyes lit up when she saw the necklace for the first time. It had been New Year's Eve, and he had planned to propose. But that night had ended in heartbreak, with no engagement, no answers, and no Grace. Now, the necklace felt like a ghost from the past, urging him to uncover the truth. Unable to sit still, William called his assistant. "Diane, back into the office. I need you to dig into Sophia's background," he said, his tone sharp. "Anything you can find about her mother. Where they lived, who they knew, everything." Diane nodded, her concern evident. "You're sure about this?" she asked. "If she really is connected to Grace, this could get messy." William met her gaze, determination burning in his eyes. "I need answers, Diane. I can't let this go." Meanwhile, Sophia stood at the edge of Central Park, staring out at the frozen lake. The city lights glittered around her, but her thoughts were far away. Her encounter with William had left her shaken. Could it be true? Could her mother have had an entire life, a love that she never shared with her? Digging through her purse, Sophia pulled out the necklace. It felt heavier now, laden with the weight of its history. She remembered the way her mother used to clutch it during difficult moments, as if it held some unspoken power. But why had her mother kept such a significant part of her life a secret? Sophia's phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a message from William. "Meet me at the Brooklyn address on this card tomorrow morning. We need to talk." Attached was a photo of an old townhouse. Sophia frowned. She didn't recognize the place. But something about the message felt urgent. She decided to go, despite the gnawing feeling of uncertainty. The next morning, Sophia found herself standing in front of a dilapidated townhouse in Brooklyn. The building looked like it hadn't been touched in years. its paint peeling and windows clouded with dust. William was already there, waiting at the foot of the steps. "This is where Grace and I lived," he said quietly. Before everything fell apart, Sophia followed him inside, her footsteps echoing in the empty space. The house was eerily quiet, as if the walls themselves had been holding onto secrets. William led her to a small, dusty room filled with old furniture and forgotten memories. "This was her studio," he said, motioning to a corner filled with faded sketches and broken easels. "She used to paint here. She had so much talent, so much passion." Sophia wandered through the room, her fingers grazing the remnants of Grace's life. In the corner of the desk, she noticed a journal, its pages yellowed with age. She picked it up carefully, her heart racing. "Do you think this belonged to her?" she asked, holding it out to William. He took the journal, his hands trembling. Flipping through the pages, his eyes scanned the entries. At first, they were filled with mundane notes about her art and daily life. But then, the tone shifted. The entries became darker, filled with fear and uncertainty. "She wrote about someone watching her," William said, his voice barely audible. "She was scared. Sophia. She thought someone was following her." Sophia's breath caught in her throat. "Do you think that's why she left?" William nodded slowly. "It's starting to make sense. I don't think Grace left by choice. I think someone forced her to disappear." The air in the abandoned townhouse was thick with dust and memories, but the weight of Grace's journal made it feel suffocating. William sat silently in the corner of the studio, flipping through its fragile pages, his expression growing darker with each word. Sophia stood nearby, her arms crossed tightly as she tried to process everything. For years, she had believed her mother's story, a quiet woman who left New York to start fresh. Now, those truths were unraveling into something far more sinister. "Listen to this," William said, his voice low and tense. He began reading aloud from one of the entries, dated just days before Grace vanished. "I feel him watching again. Every time I leave the townhouse, I see the black car parked at the corner. The same man always steps out, just for a moment. Like he wants me to know he's there. I don't know what he wants, but I'm scared. I can't tell William. It will ruin everything." Sophia shivered as the words sank in. "Who do you think she was talking about?" she asked. William shook his head, his jaw tightening. "I don't know, but it wasn't a coincidence. Whoever this man was, he knew Grace was connected to me. She was trying to protect me, Sophia. That's why she didn't tell me." Sophia took a hesitant step forward, her voice trembling. Do you think that man made her leave, forced her to disappear?" William looked up, his eyes filled with both anger and guilt. "It's possible. Grace wouldn't have left on her own. She loved this city, this house, and me." His voice softened at the last word, his resolve momentarily faltering. But someone scared her enough to make her walk away from everything. Determined to dig deeper, William contacted Diane, instructing her to investigate the townhouse's history. Within hours, she called back with unsettling news. "William," she said cautiously, "I found a report from the time Grace went missing. Neighbors filed complaints about a man lurking near the property. The police questioned him, but nothing came of it. His name was Victor Sterling." The name hit William like a punch to the chest. Victor had been his closest friend and business partner back then, a man he had trusted like a brother. They had built Grant Jewels together, working side by side to turn a modest startup into an empire. But toward the end, their partnership had soured. Victor had grown resentful, jealous of William's success and his relationship with Grace. "It was Victor," William said through gritted teeth, his mind racing. He was the one watching her. Sophia's brow furrowed. But why? What could he possibly have wanted from her? William's hands clenched into fists as the realization dawned. Leverage. He wanted to destroy me, and he knew Grace was my greatest weakness. The next day, William and Sophia headed to Victor's last known address, a lavish penthouse overlooking the Hudson River. The atmosphere between them was tense, the weight of what they might uncover pressing down on them. As they entered the opulent building, William's mind swirled with memories of Victor. He remembered the arguments, the betrayal, and the moment he had severed their partnership for good. But he had never imagined Victor would stoop so low as to involve Grace. They reached the penthouse door, and William knocked firmly. A few moments later, the door opened, revealing a man with silver hair and piercing eyes. Despite the years, Victor's smug demeanor was unmistakable. Well, Victor said, leaning against the doorframe. If it isn't William Grant. To what do I owe the pleasure? William's tone was icy. We need to talk. About Grace. Victor's smirk faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered. Stepping aside to let them in, the interior of the penthouse was as grand as William remembered. Polished marble floors, priceless artwork, and an air of arrogance that matched Victor's personality. Grace, Victor said casually as he poured himself a drink. Now there's a name I haven't heard in years. What about her? William's patience snapped. Cut the act. Victor, I know you were stalking her. I know you scared her into leaving. Victor chuckled, swirling his glass of whiskey. Stalking? Such an ugly word. I prefer to think of it as taking an interest. Sophia stepped forward, her voice sharp. You ruined her life, and mine. Why? What could you possibly gain from doing that? Victor's eyes flicked to Sophia, and for the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed his face. So this is her, isn't it? The daughter. I always wondered if Grace. He trailed off, his expression darkening. Answer the question, William demanded, his voice dangerously low. Victor set down his glass, his smirk fading. You want the truth? Fine. Yes. I wanted Grace out of the picture. She was a distraction, your Achilles heel. You were too focused on her, too distracted to see the bigger picture. So, I gave her a choice, leave, or watch everything you love burn. Sophia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. William took a threatening step forward, his fists clenched. You manipulated her, terrified her into disappearing. Do you even understand what you did to her? To us? Victor's eyes hardened. Don't act like a saint, William. You had everything handed to you, success, love, power. I had to fight for scraps. Grace was just collateral damage. The confrontation ended abruptly when Victor's phone buzzed, and he glanced at the screen, his expression shifting. Looks like our little reunion is over, he said, smirking once more. But if you really want to know what happened to Grace, you'll have to dig deeper. She didn't just vanish. Someone made sure she stayed hidden. Before William could respond, Victor walked out, leaving them standing in the penthouse, his cryptic words hanging in the air. Sophia turned to William, her eyes filled with determination. We can't stop now, she said. If he knows where my mother is, we have to find her. William nodded, his jaw set. We will, no matter what it takes. William and Sophia left Victor's penthouse, their minds swirling with anger, frustration, and more questions than answers. Victor's cryptic words replayed in William's mind. She didn't just vanish. Someone made sure she stayed hidden. Who could he have meant? And why would anyone want to ensure Grace remained out of sight? Back in the sleek comfort of William's car, the tension was palpable. Sophia sat quietly in the passenger seat, her fingers gripping the necklace like a lifeline. She finally broke the silence, her voice filled with determination. We have to figure this out, she said firmly. If Victor knows more, he won't give it up easily. He's playing games. William nodded, his jaw tight. He always has, but we're not stopping here. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles whitening. If Victor is telling the truth, and someone else was involved in keeping Grace away, we're not just dealing with an old grudge. There's a bigger game at play. The next day, William called Diane to his office. The trusted assistant had already begun looking into Victor's activities, and what she found was troubling. Victor's been meeting regularly with a man named Edward Rains, Diane explained, placing a stack of documents on William's desk. Rains is a private investigator, highly skilled, but with a reputation for working on the wrong side of the law. If Victor hired him to track or manipulate Grace, he might be the key to finding her. William studied the files, his expression grim. "Do we know where to find him?" Diane nodded. "He keeps an office downtown, but it's likely he won't cooperate willingly." "I'll make him cooperate," William said coldly. Later that evening, William and Sophia stood outside a rundown building in a less polished part of Manhattan. The faded sign on the door read, "Rains Investigations." Inside, the air smelled of stale cigarettes and old paper. Edward Rains was seated at his desk, a burly man with a rough demeanor that matched his surroundings. As soon as Rains saw William, his face darkened. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice gruff. "I don't talk to people like you without a good reason. You'll talk to me today," William replied, his voice steely. He placed Grace's journal on the desk in front of Rains. "Tell me what you know about her." Rains glanced at the journal, his expression unreadable. "I don't know what you're talking about." Sophia stepped forward, her voice sharp. "Don't lie to us. We know Victor hired you. If you know where my mother is, you'd better start talking." Rains leaned back in his chair, studying Sophia for a moment, before letting out a heavy sigh. "Victor didn't hire me to find Grace," he said slowly. "He hired me to keep her hidden." The words hit like a thunderclap. William's eyes narrowed, his anger barely contained. "Explain," he demanded. Rains hesitated, then reached for a folder buried under a pile of papers. He slid it across the desk. Inside were photographs of Grace, older, worn, but undeniably her. She was seated on the porch of a modest cabin, surrounded by trees. The setting was remote, isolated. "She's been living upstate," Rains admitted. "Victor wanted her out of your life, said she was a threat to your empire. He paid me to make sure she stayed put, away from the city, away from you." Sophia's voice trembled. "Did you threaten her? Did you hurt her?" Rains shook his head. "No. She went willingly. Said she didn't want to drag you down, but Victor made sure she couldn't come back. Every time she tried to leave, I'd be there, reminding her of what she had to lose." William's fists clenched. "You manipulated her, controlled her. For what?" Rains met his gaze without flinching. "It wasn't just Victor. There were others, people who stood to gain if you were distracted. Grace was a pawn, nothing more." William and Sophia left the office in silence, the weight of what they had learned pressing down on them. The photographs of Grace felt like both a lifeline and a curse. She was alive, but the web of lies surrounding her was more complex than they'd imagined. As they walked back to the car, Sophia turned to William, her voice shaky. "We need to go to her. Now, she's been trapped long enough." William nodded. "We will. But if Rains is telling the truth, this isn't just about finding Grace. It's about taking down everyone who played a part in this." That night, William sat in his office, staring at the photographs of Grace. The cabin in the pictures was remote, surrounded by dense forest. It would take hours to reach, but that wasn't what troubled him. It was the look in Grace's eyes, haunted, tired, and resigned. She had been carrying the weight of their separation for years, just as he had. Sophia entered the room, her face set with determination. "When do we leave?" William glanced up. The fire in his eyes rekindled. "First thing in the morning. If Grace is out there, we're bringing her home." The early morning sunlight struggled to pierce through the dense forest as William and Sophia navigated the winding roads leading to the remote cabin. The air was crisp, almost biting, as if the winter chill wanted to warn them of what lay ahead. Every mile brought them closer to Grace and the truth, but also deeper into the web of manipulation that had kept her hidden for so many years. Sophia sat in the passenger seat, clutching the photographs of her mother. Her mind raced with emotions, hope, anger, fear. She had spent her entire life wondering why her mother seemed to live in shadows, and now the answers were within reach. But the fear of what they might find gnawed at her. "What if she doesn't want to see us?" Sophia asked softly, breaking the silence. William's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "She will," he said firmly. "She's been forced into this isolation. Sophia, she didn't choose it. And if Victor's influence is still lingering, we'll put an end to it." The cabin finally came into view. Hidden among the trees, it was modest, almost nondescript, but something about it felt heavy, as if it carried the weight of years of secrets. William parked the car a short distance away, the crunch of gravel under the tires, the only sound breaking the stillness. The father and daughter approached the cabin cautiously. William knocked on the door, his heart pounding. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, the sound of hesitant footsteps from within reached their ears. The door creaked open slightly, and there she was, Grace. She stood in the doorway, her face pale and gaunt, but unmistakably her. Her eyes widened in shock as she took in the sight of William and Sophia. For a moment, no one spoke. The years of separation, pain, and unanswered questions hung heavily between them. "Grace," William finally said, his voice trembling. "It's me." Her hand clutched the edge of the door, her body stiff with a mix of fear and disbelief. "William," she whispered, her voice cracking. Sophia stepped forward, her own emotions spilling over. "Mom, it's me. It's Sophia." Grace's gaze shifted to her daughter, her eyes brimming with tears. "Sophia," she breathed, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. She opened the door wider, and for the first time, they saw just how much the years had taken from her. She looked like a shadow of the vibrant woman William once knew. "Come in," Grace said finally, stepping aside. The inside of the cabin was as modest as its exterior. A small fireplace crackled weakly in the corner, and the furniture was sparse. Grace gestured for them to sit, but it was clear she was overwhelmed. Her hands trembled as she poured tea, her movements uncertain. William broke the silence. "Grace, we know about Victor, about what he did to keep you here." Grace froze, the teacup in her hand rattling. "You shouldn't have come," she said, her voice a mix of fear and urgency. "If Victor finds out—" "He won't," William interrupted, his tone resolute. "Victor's games are over. We're here to take you back, Grace, to fix what he broke." Grace's shoulders sagged, as if the weight of her secrets was finally too much to bear. "You don't understand," she said softly. "It's not just Victor. There are others, people who wanted to destroy everything you built. William, they threatened me. Sophia, I couldn't risk it." Sophia's voice shook with emotion. "Mom, I grew up without you because of them. We both suffered. But you don't have to be afraid anymore." Grace looked at her daughter, tears streaming down her face. "I thought I was protecting you," she whispered. "Every time I tried to leave, they reminded me of what they could take from me, from you." The emotional reunion was interrupted by the sudden sound of car tires crunching on gravel. All three of them froze, their eyes darting to the window. A sleek black SUV pulled up, its tinted windows hiding whoever was inside. William's instincts kicked in immediately. "Stay here," he said firmly, standing and moving toward the door. "No," Grace said, panic rising in her voice. "It's them." Sophia stood, her resolve hardening. "We're not running anymore." William opened the door just as two men in suits stepped out of the SUV. Their expressions were cold, professional, and unnervingly calm. One of them spoke, his voice sharp. "William Grant, we need to have a word." William stepped outside, closing the door behind him but leaving it slightly ajar so Sophia and Grace could hear. "You've already said too much," William said coldly. "Victor's lies are falling apart, and if you're here to clean up his mess, you're wasting your time." The man's smirk was chilling. "Victor's not the only one you should be worried about. There are bigger players in this game, and they don't like loose ends." William's fists clenched, his anger simmering. "You can tell whoever sent you that Grace is coming home with me, and if you or anyone else tries to stop us, I'll make sure they regret it." The man took a step closer, his smirk never faltering. "Careful, Mr. Grant. You're meddling in things you don't fully understand." Walk away now, and maybe we'll let you keep what's left of your precious empire. William's voice was like steel. Get off this property, now. The men exchanged a glance before stepping back into the SUV. The vehicle reversed down the driveway, disappearing into the trees. But their warning hung in the air like a storm cloud. Back inside, Grace was trembling. "They'll come back," she said, her voice breaking. "They won't stop." William knelt beside her, his expression fierce. "Then we'll fight, together. I'm not losing you again, Grace." Sophia placed her hand over her mother's. "We're stronger than they think. They've controlled us long enough." As the fire crackled in the corner, the three of them sat together, bound by their shared pain and determination. They knew the battle wasn't over, but for the first time in years, they had hope and each other. The confrontation with Victor's men had left William, Sophia, and Grace shaken but resolute. The threats were real, but so was their determination to fight back. For Grace, it was a moment of reckoning. 20 years of silence, fear, and isolation were finally crumbling under the weight of her family's resolve. Yet, she knew they were only scratching the surface of a larger conspiracy. As the evening wore on, the family huddled in the modest living room of the cabin. Grace clutched her hands tightly in her lap, her eyes distant. Sophia sat beside her, her voice soft but insistent. "Mom, we need to know everything. If we're going to fight them, we can't do it in the dark." Grace hesitated, her lips trembling. "It's not just Victor," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. They was the face of it. But there are others. People with money, influence, and power. People who wanted to control William's empire. William leaned forward, his expression grim. "Who are they?" Grace swallowed hard. "Victor worked for a group of investors, hidden partners in your business. William, they weren't just after your company. They wanted complete control, and they knew they could get it by using me." Sophia's eyes widened. "So they made you leave? To break Dad?" Grace nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "Victor threatened me, but he wasn't working alone. They told me if I stayed, they'd destroy you, William, and they'd take Sophia. I couldn't let that happen." William clenched his fists, anger simmering just beneath the surface. "And they kept you hidden all these years. Why didn't you come to me? We could have fought them together." Grace's voice broke. "I didn't know how. Every time I tried to leave, they reminded me of their reach, how they could ruin you with a phone call. I thought staying away was the only way to protect you both." Sophia placed a comforting hand on her mother's shoulder. "You're not alone anymore. They don't control us." The next morning, as the sun rose over the forest, William made a decision. "We need to get out of here," he said. "They know where you are." "Grace, staying here is too dangerous." Grace hesitated. "Where can we go?" "They'll find us no matter where we run." William's jaw tightened. "We're not running. We're taking the fight to them." Diane had called earlier with more information about Victor's network. She had uncovered a hidden ledger that tied Victor and his associates to offshore accounts used to fund their operations. Among the names listed was Edward Rains, the private investigator, but there was also another name, Alan Mercer, a high-profile corporate attorney with ties to organized crime. "If we take down Mercer," William explained, "we can cut off their funding and expose their entire operation." Sophia looked between her parents, her resolve hardening. "So, what's the plan?" The family devised a risky strategy. They would head to Mercer's estate, located on the outskirts of the city, where he was known to host private gatherings for his associates. Grace would stay hidden at a safe house arranged by Diane, while William and Sophia confronted Mercer directly. The plan was dangerous, but there was no turning back. With Grace's safety secured, William and Sophia drove into the heart of enemy territory. The estate was sprawling, surrounded by high walls and security cameras. Diane had managed to get them forged invitations to the event, a charity gala that masked the darker dealings happening behind closed doors. Sophia adjusted her evening gown nervously as they approached the entrance. "Are you sure about this?" she whispered. William's voice was steady. "We don't have a choice. If we can get the evidence we need, we can finally end this." Inside, the estate was a picture of opulence, crystal chandeliers, marble floors, and waiters carrying trays of champagne. But beneath the glamour was a chilling undercurrent of power and corruption. William scanned the room, his eyes locking onto Alan Mercer. The attorney was in his late 40s, his sharp suit and smug demeanor radiating confidence. He stood surrounded by a small group of men, all of them laughing like they had the world at their feet. "Stay close," William murmured to Sophia as they moved through the crowd. Their goal was to reach Mercer's private office, where Diane had informed them the ledgers and incriminating documents were likely stored. But getting there unnoticed would require subtlety and a distraction. Sophia took a deep breath and stepped forward, catching Mercer's attention. "Mr. Mercer," she said with a bright smile, "I've heard so much about your work. Could I have a moment of your time?" Mercer turned to her, his curiosity piqued. "Of course, my dear. And you are?" "An admirer of your success," Sophia said, skillfully engaging him in conversation, while William slipped past the group and toward the hallway leading to the office. Inside Mercer's office, William worked quickly. Diane had provided him with a USB drive preloaded with software to copy the files. As he searched through the drawers, he found the ledger, thick, detailed, and damning. He snapped photos of key pages with his phone before plugging in the USB to download the rest of the data from Mercer's computer. Suddenly, footsteps echoed in the hallway. William froze, his pulse quickening. The door creaked open, and a security guard stepped in, his eyes narrowing. "Who are you? And what are you doing here?" William acted fast. "Mercer sent me," he said, his tone authoritative. He needed these files secured immediately. The guard hesitated, but before he could respond, Sophia appeared in the doorway. "There you are," she said brightly, looping her arm through William's. "Sorry for the delay. Mr. Mercer is waiting." The guard frowned but stepped aside, allowing them to leave. As they exited the estate, adrenaline coursed through their veins. William gripped the ledger tightly, his voice filled with determination. "This is it. The evidence we need to bring them down." Sophia smiled faintly, but her eyes were filled with resolve. "Let's finish this." The car ride back to the safe house was heavy with tension. The ledger and files William had taken from Mercer's estate were solid proof of the conspiracy that had kept Grace in hiding. Yet, they both knew their battle was far from over. Mercer and his network were powerful, and exposing them would mean risking everything. Sophia broke the silence, her voice steady but tinged with urgency. "We have what we need, but how do we make sure they can't bury this? These people aren't just going to sit back and let us take them down." William's jaw tightened as he gripped the steering wheel. "We need to go public. Expose them before they have a chance to retaliate. If this hits the media, they won't be able to silence it." Sophia nodded. "Do we have enough?" "Diane's been amazing. But will this hold up?" William glanced at the stack of documents in the back seat. "It will. The ledger ties Victor, Mercer, and their associates to embezzlement, blackmail, and illegal activities across multiple companies. And the offshore accounts connect them to Grace's disappearance. Once this is out, they'll have nowhere to hide." Back at the safe house, Grace was waiting for them. She looked fragile but determined, her hands clasped tightly as she paced the small room. When they walked in, her eyes immediately darted to the files in William's hands. "Did you find what you needed?" she asked, her voice trembling. William nodded, setting the ledger on the table. "We did. This is the proof we've been looking for, but going after them won't be easy." Grace sank into a chair, her face pale. "They won't let this go. You know what they're capable of." "William," Sophia stepped forward, her voice firm. "We're not letting them win, Mom. They've controlled our lives for too long. It's time they face justice." The next few hours were a blur of preparation. Diane had arranged for a trusted journalist to meet with them, someone known for uncovering corruption and bringing powerful people to justice. The meeting was set for that evening at a neutral location. As the time approached, Grace grew visibly anxious. "What if they come after you?" she asked, her voice cracking. "I couldn't bear it if they hurt you because of me." William placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We've come too far to turn back now. They took everything from us." "Grace, it's time we take it back," Sophia nodded. "We'll be careful, but we can't stay silent anymore." That evening, the three of them arrived at the meeting point, a quiet, dimly lit coffee shop on the outskirts of the city. The journalist, a sharp-eyed woman named Laura Carter, was already waiting for them. Her reputation for taking down corporate giants had made her the perfect ally. William slid the ledger and a USB drive across the table. "This has everything you need: proof of embezzlement, illegal activity, and connections to my wife's disappearance." Laura flipped through the ledger, her eyes widening. "This is explosive," she said, her tone serious. "If this goes public, it'll destroy them. That's the plan," William said. "But we need your help to make sure it sticks. These people are dangerous. They'll do anything to protect themselves." Laura nodded. "I'll get this out as soon as possible. But you should prepare yourselves. They won't go down without a fight." Just as they were leaving the coffee shop, William's phone buzzed. The number was unknown, but something told him to answer. "Grant," the voice on the other end growled. It was Victor. "You think you've won, don't you?" William's grip tightened on the phone. "You're finished, Victor. We have the proof, and it's going public." Victor chuckled darkly. "You think a few documents are enough to take us down? You don't understand the game you're playing. We own the board." William's voice was cold. "Not anymore." Victor's tone shifted, becoming more menacing. "Enjoy your little victory while it lasts. You won't have much time to celebrate." The call ended abruptly, leaving a chilling silence in its wake. Back at the safe house, the tension was palpable. Grace sat by the window, staring out into the darkness, while Sophia paced the room. "What did he say?" Sophia asked, her voice sharp. William sighed. "He knows what we're doing. He's trying to scare us." Grace turned to them, her eyes filled with fear. "You don't know Victor like I do. He doesn't bluff." William crossed the room, his expression resolute. "Let him come. We're ready." The next morning, news broke. Laura had published the story, and it was already gaining traction. Headlines blared across the internet. Corporate giants tied to corruption, kidnapping, and fraud. The evidence was undeniable, and public outrage was swift. William and Sophia watched the news unfold from the safe house, their hearts pounding. Grace sat beside them, her hand trembling as she reached for William's. "We did it," she whispered. "We really did it." William nodded, but his expression remained serious. "It's not over yet. They'll fight back." As the hours passed, the backlash against Victor and his associates grew. Investigations were launched, and warrants were issued. Yet, as night fell, the safe house's quiet was shattered by the sound of tires screeching to a halt outside. William grabbed his phone, dialing Diane. "We've been found," he said tersely. "Send help. Now." Sophia moved to stand beside him, her face pale but determined. "What do we do?" William's voice was firm. "We fight. Together." The screeching tires outside the safe house jolted William, Sophia, and Grace into action. The air was tense, charged with the weight of everything they had fought for. William moved quickly, locking the doors and scanning the room for anything that could serve as a defense. Sophia grabbed her phone, ready to call Diane or the authorities if necessary. Through the window, they saw 3 black SUVs parked in the driveway. Men in suits, clearly armed, emerged and began approaching the house with military precision. It was clear Victor had sent his enforcers, a final desperate move to silence them. "Stay behind me," William said firmly, his voice calm despite the chaos unfolding. "Whatever happens, we stick together." Grace's hands trembled as she clung to Sophia. "This is my fault. she whispered. "I never should have let it come to this." Sophia placed a hand on her mother's shoulder. "It's not your fault, Mom, and we're not letting them win." As the men surrounded the house, William's phone buzzed. It was Diane. "Help is on the way," she said urgently, "but you'll need to hold them off for a few minutes. Can you do that?" "We don't have a choice," William replied. "They're not taking this family apart again." He hung up and turned to Sophia. "If anything happens, you and your mother go out the back. Don't stop. Don't look back." Sophia met his gaze, her eyes blazing with determination. "We're not leaving you." The men outside began pounding on the door. "Grant," one of them shouted, "this doesn't have to get ugly. Hand over the files, and we'll walk away." William moved to the door, speaking loudly enough for them to hear. "The files are already out. Everyone knows what you've done. There's no deal to be made." The leader's voice was cold. "Then you've left us no choice." A loud crash shattered the tense silence as they broke through the front door. William stood his ground, using the narrow hallway to his advantage. He grabbed a heavy lamp and swung it at the first man who approached, knocking him to the floor. Sophia and Grace scrambled to the back of the house, but Sophia paused, grabbing a fire extinguisher. When another man burst through the back door, she sprayed it in his face, disorienting him long enough for Grace to shove a chair into his path. The sound of sirens pierced the air, growing louder with every passing second. The men hesitated, their calculated movements faltering. They knew reinforcements were coming. The leader scowled, glaring at William. "This isn't over," he hissed before retreating. One by one, the men fled, leaving the family shaken but unharmed. The police arrived moments later, followed by Diane. She rushed to William, her face a mixture of relief and concern. "Are you okay?" "We're fine," William replied, his voice steady. "But it's time to end this for good." In the days that followed, Victor and his associates were arrested. The public outcry continued to grow as more details of their corruption and crimes came to light. The network that had kept Grace in hiding was dismantled, piece by piece. For the first time in years, William, Sophia, and Grace felt a sense of peace. The weight of the past was lifting, replaced by hope for the future. One quiet evening, the three of them sat on the balcony of William's Manhattan penthouse, overlooking the city lights. The air was cool but comforting, a stark contrast to the chaos they had endured. "Do you think it's really over?" Grace asked softly, her gaze fixed on the skyline. William reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "It's over. They can't hurt us anymore." Sophia leaned back in her chair, a small smile on her lips. "We fought for this. We deserve to move forward." Grace turned to her daughter, tears glistening in her eyes. "Thank you, Sophia, for never giving up, for bringing us back together." Sophia smiled, wiping her own tears. "We're stronger together, Mom, always." As they toasted to new beginnings, William looked at his family, his heart filled with gratitude. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, it felt possible. And that's the end of this incredible journey. A story of love, resilience, and fighting for justice. What would you have done in their shoes? Do you think they made the right choices? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like, please share, and subscribe to our channel for more gripping stories like this one. See you in the next video.